11 months for the man she loved. But when the war ended, only silence came back. Letters unanswered. Promises broken by captivity. And then, one night, a message appeared, carried by the river. A story the world almost forgot. The prisoner who never returned, a love shattered by time, yet remembered forever. The war had ended, but for many, peace never truly arrived. In a small village torn by years of conflict, letters stopped coming home, and silence became the loudest sound. Among those waiting was Anna, a young woman who stood by her window every evening, clutching a worn photograph of Lukas, the man she loved, a soldier taken prisoner in the final months of war. He had promised to return before spring, but 11 months had passed since the fighting stopped. And still no word. Every day, Anna visited the empty train station, watching the returning soldiers step off the platform, their eyes hollow with stories too heavy to tell. Each time the whistle blew, her heart hoped, only to break again when his face wasn't there. The village had begun to move on. The church bells now rang for weddings, not funerals. But Anna couldn't forget. She still wrote him letters, addressed to nowhere. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, Lukas sat in a freezing prison camp, barely alive, surviving on memory alone. He whispered her name each night, tracing her face in the air with trembling hands. No one knew if he would ever find his way home. Because the war had taken many prisoners, but it was love that kept some of them alive. Snow covered the prison camp like a graveyard shroud. Barbed wire fences glistened in the cold sun, and beyond them, men who once wore medals now begged for warmth. Among them was Lukas, his uniform torn, his spirit unbroken. Every morning began with the same routine, a harsh whistle, the clanking of chains, and the endless march to dig trenches in frozen soil. But every night, when others surrendered to despair, Lukas whispered the same words to himself. "Hold on, Anna, just a little longer." He had hidden a single photograph of her inside his boot, the edges now faded, the image barely visible. That small piece of paper had kept him alive through starvation, fever, and frostbite. One evening, as the guards threw scraps of food toward the prisoners, Lukas shared his piece of bread with a dying man beside him. The man, an old mechanic named Yuri, whispered a promise before closing his eyes for the last time. "If one of us gets out, tell the world we were more than numbers." The camp had become a place where time didn't move, only memories did. And yet, Lukas refused to forget. He began scratching days onto the wall with a rusted nail, marking time not by months, but by hope. Then, one morning, the sound of gunfire echoed through the valley, not from execution, but liberation. The war was over. Truly this time. As soldiers stormed the camp and broke open the gates, Lukas collapsed to his knees. The sky that day was clear for the first time in months. He thought only of Anna, her letters he'd never received, her voice he'd never heard again. But fate wasn't done testing them yet. Because freedom, he would soon discover, didn't always mean going home. When Lukas finally stepped out of the camp, he could barely stand. His body was broken, but his heart beat with one purpose, to return to Anna. He was given a coat by a kind soldier and a small piece of bread. That was all. For days he walked through ruined towns, past homes without roofs, churches turned to ashes, and streets littered with letters no one would ever read. Each village whispered the same story. They're gone. Moved or dead. Still, Lukas pressed on. The thought of Anna waiting at the window, watching the horizon for him, kept his feet moving. At last, one cold morning, he saw the familiar outline of his hometown. The same crooked tower, the same cobblestone path, but everything else had changed. The air was silent, the laughter gone. He climbed the old hill where their home once stood. The garden they planted together was now wild and overgrown, the paint peeling from the door. He knocked once. No answer. Twice. Then, the door opened. There she was, Anna, her face pale, her hands trembling as she looked at him like seeing a ghost. "Lukas," she whispered. He wanted to smile, to hold her, to tell her he had kept his promise, but before he could, he saw it. A man's jacket hanging on the chair behind her. The silence that followed was heavier than any prison. War had stolen 11 months from him, but it had stolen a lifetime from them both. Anna's eyes filled with tears. "They told me you were dead," she said softly. "I waited. I swear I did." Lukas nodded, his throat tightening. "I know." He looked around the house. Their pictures were gone, replaced with new faces, new memories. He took one final breath, then gently placed the photograph he had carried all those months, the one from his boot, onto the table. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you were the reason I survived." Then he walked out into the fading light of evening. He had come home, but he no longer had one. Lukas walked away from the only home he had ever known, each step heavier than the last. Behind him, the faint sound of the door closing echoed like a final goodbye. He wandered through the broken streets, the same ones he had once run across to meet Anna after school. Now every stone, every corner carried a memory, and a reminder that time does not wait for the living or the lost. For days, Lukas stayed in the nearby village, sleeping in barns and abandoned train stations. He couldn't bring himself to leave the town completely, not yet. He watched from a distance as Anna carried groceries, as the man helped fix the roof. Their laughter stung him, but he didn't hate her. He only hated the war. One evening, Lukas sat by the river where they had once made promises under the stars. He pulled out a small notebook, the only thing he had kept hidden through his imprisonment. Inside were letters to Anna, dozens of them. Letters that were never sent, words that were never read. He tore the last page from the notebook and began to write not to her, but to time itself. "You took everything, but you couldn't take my love. You may have broken my body, but you didn't win." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Lukas placed the notebook in a glass bottle and let it drift into the river, carrying his story to a place where maybe, just maybe, someone would understand. Months later, he moved to the city and began working at a railway station. He never married, never spoke of Anna again. But every year, on the day he was freed from the camp, he returned to that river to watch the current flow and remember what love had once meant. Some say one of those bottles was found decades later on a distant shore, with faded ink that read, "To the one I waited for, even when the waiting ended." Decades passed. The town changed, new buildings rose, old ones fell, and the memories of war faded into the whispers of history. But one quiet morning in 1982, something extraordinary happened. Two children were playing by the riverbank near the old mill, skipping stones into the current, when one of them noticed a glass bottle lodged in the mud. The cork was worn, and the paper inside yellowed with age. They ran to show it to their grandfather, an old fisherman who had seen too much life to be surprised by anything. But when he opened the bottle and unfolded the letter, his hands began to tremble. The words were written in careful cursive, faded but still legible. "To the one I waited for, even when the waiting ended." He took the letter to the town museum, where a historian began tracing its origin. After months of research, they found something remarkable. The letter was written by Lukas Weber, a local railway worker who had died quietly in 1965. His story had been forgotten until that day. Soon, the town rediscovered its lost past. Old neighbors spoke of Lukas, the kind man who always smiled but carried sadness in his eyes. And Anna, who had long since grown old, heard the news too. When she saw the letter displayed behind the glass at the museum, tears filled her eyes. Her husband had died years earlier, but the ache of that first love never truly faded. She whispered softly to the letter through the glass, "You came back, Lukas. Just not the way I hoped." That day, Anna left a small white rose beneath the display. a gesture of forgiveness, remembrance, and eternal love. The letter remained there, becoming a symbol of how war destroys lives, but never conquers the human heart. And as the years went on, visitors from around the world came to see it, to read a message that had crossed both time and sorrow. To the one I waited for, even when the waiting ended, the river carried it away once, but destiny carried it home. The story of Lukas Weber and Anna Muller became more than just a forgotten wartime romance. It became a mirror for every soul who ever waited for someone who didn't return. Years after Anna's passing, her home was turned into a small memorial by local volunteers. Inside her modest living room, they found dozens of unopened letters, all addressed to Lukas. Each envelope carried the same handwriting, the same trembling hope. She had written him every year on the date he disappeared. She never mailed them. She simply kept them. The curator of the town museum read one of those letters aloud at the memorial. "If you are out there, Lukas, I still sit by the window when it rains. The drops remind me of the night you left. And sometimes when the thunder rolls, I imagine it's your train coming home." Silence filled the room. No one spoke, because everyone knew this was more than history. It was the sound of a heart that refused to forget. Today, travelers who pass through that same town stop by the museum. They stand before the glass case where Lukas's bottle rests beside Anna's final letter. The exhibit is small, just a few photos, 2 names, and one white rose that's replaced every spring. But people linger. They read, they feel. A plaque below the case reads, "Love does not end when time does." Some promises are eternal. Outside, the river still flows past the town, whispering softly as if carrying their voices downstream. Sometimes, the sunset turns the water gold, and those who know the story say, it feels like Lukas and Anna are there again, walking hand in hand, somewhere beyond the years. Because even after war, loss, and silence, love finds a way home. European.
Thanks you for watch. Every old story holds a lesson worth remembering. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe for watch and listen more old times, real stories, and don't forget,